Welcome to the Acrylic Portrait Painting Challenge Masterclass, lesson number 3, sealing in your sketch and beginning the painting. Hey, I'm excited you're here again, and I want to say thank you so much if you've already begun this challenge for committing your trust to me to be able to teach you the next steps in this portrait painting. It's been exciting to see so many sketches in our Facebook group, seeing the students enjoy that part of the process. And here's the thing. If you can do a realistic sketch, you can do a realistic painting, because the sketch is one of the most important steps of the process. And that's where we finished off with lesson number 2. We did a realistic sketch, getting in all the proportions, getting in the likeness. We were aiming for perfection, but realizing that perfection is not possible in this life, and just being happy that we took the challenge, that we overcame our fears, and we created something we could be proud of. And if you've done that, I want to give you high fives and just say, that's awesome, and I'm proud of you. And this next step where we actually begin the painting process is going to be really fun. So let's dive in. Actually, before we get into the lesson, I would like to invite you to actually take the challenge. If you haven't signed up, I would be remiss if I didn't give you that opportunity. But you can sign up for the challenge below. I have a link for you. It's at realisticacrylic.com/acrylic-portrait-painting-challenge. Now, when you sign up, I'd like to give you a welcome kit, and that includes everything you're going to need to be able to paint this portrait along with this. You'll get the reference photo with and without the grid. You'll get the supplies list, of course. You know what paint to buy and what brushes you'll need to do this challenge, what kind of canvas, and all the good things. Also, we'll send you the palette layout guide so you know how to lay out the paints on your palette so they're not muddy and you can get a nice mix of colors. And then lastly, I'll send you the masterclass lesson schedule so you'll know what classes are coming out and when, roughly speaking. You know, it's all tentative, but it'll give you a good idea of what you can expect coming down the line here and what your next steps will be. You'll get all those masterclass lessons sent to you via email when you sign up, so you don't have to go hunting them down. They'll be right in your inbox as soon as they're released. But go ahead, sign up for the challenge. We have many artists taking this, and it's just awesome to be a part of a community of artists where you can be encouraged, you can encourage them, and you can do something fun and enjoyable together. And no matter what your goal is, whether you want to learn how to paint portraits so you can do beautiful paintings of your grandchildren, or enter them into art shows, maybe do commission paintings, whatever that is, I'm excited to be able to teach you and take you down that journey. So anyway, sign up for the challenge. It's going to be a lot of fun. All right, now if you haven't done this already, you've already begun the challenge and you have done a sketch, this is your next assignment. I would like you to be able to post your sketch in the Facebook group, Realistic Acrylic Portraits. So if you've already done your sketch, you would like some people to check it out, see what you've done. If you have any questions maybe, or you're wondering about, did I capture the likeness? Are the proportions accurate? Anything at all, you can post that in the Facebook group, and you'll have myself and other artists commenting on your work, and we would love to help you with that. So go ahead and post that in the Facebook group, and we'll be happy to help you out there. All right, now let's dive in with a word of prayer and invite God to help us here with this lesson, and we'll get started. Father, I come before you in Jesus' name, and I thank you for the artists that are taking this challenge. And Lord, I'm just thankful for the effort they put into this, and seeing these beautiful sketches, seeing how happy they are to be able to do a realistic sketch. And Lord, I pray that you would help me to be able to teach this next part of the process of sealing in the sketch and getting everything ready for painting and actually applying the first layer or two of paint. So bless this painting, Lord. Bless the students, keep them in good health, And I pray that you would encourage them that they can do this and they can overcome any challenges along the way to be able to paint a portrait they can be proud of. So bless this, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Now let's go over some of the supplies you're going to need to be able to do this next step here. You're going to need, first of all, a couple paint brushes. So you're going to want a 1/2 inch or 5/8 flat, and then this would be like a 1/4 inch flat, and then a size 6 round, so a small round. So something like this, doesn't have to be these exact sizes, but just something like this. And what we're going to be doing also is using some white, some titanium white. So get yourself some titanium white paint. And then you also want some matte medium as well. Now, I use Liquitex or Nova Color. Actually, these days I've been using just Nova Color matte medium. I buy it by the gallon and then I pour it into these smaller containers, where originally I bought Liquitex and I just refill these nice pint-sized containers. But if you want to get some high quality mediums or paint, you can use my affiliate link for Nova Color, and I'll have that in the description of the video. But anyway, you'll want matte medium, and with that then we're going to begin the actual process. So what is our first step? Well, step number 1 is to white out the grid lines. So we want to make sure, even before we seal in the sketch, we want to white out the grid lines. And the reason we do it here at this particular junction in the process is because if we seal in the sketch first, inevitably there's usually a little bit of smearing of the colored pencil onto the canvas, and that's normal. It's normal to have a little bit of it smear. But if you white out the grid lines ahead of time, it's going to match a lot better, because if you go ahead and you seal in, you know, your sketch, and you have a little bit of that color pencil bleeding into the matte medium and kind of toning the canvas a little bit to maybe a burnt sienna tint, then if you go over your grid lines with white paint, it's not going to match, and they're really going to stand out, all of the white paint on top of that kind of somewhat darker color, and it's just not going to look as good. So we do want to go ahead and white it out right now, and then we'll go ahead and we'll seal it in after that. So step number 1 is to white out the grid lines. So for that, just take some matte medium, or I'm sorry, titanium white. Take some titanium white and put that into your small condiment container, just a little bit. That's all you need, something about like this. And then you're going to start with your larger brush, your larger 1/2 inch 5/8 flat, and just apply that to the canvas. It's good if your paint is that kind of a consistency of maybe warm butter or maybe a thick kind of honey. If it's too thick, you'd have to add a little bit of water and thin it out. So just make sure it's not too thick, especially if you're using a heavy bodied paint. All right, so we're just going to apply that in the upper corner here, and we're going to basically go over the grid lines here in the background first. And you might be asking, should we use gesso to do this? And I would say no, don't use gesso, because gesso is not nearly as opaque as titanium white, and it's not going to cover as well. So don't use gesso for this, just use titanium white. You'll find perhaps that it is a little bit lighter in value than the primer of your canvas or the gesso, but don't be alarmed with that. It's just part of the process, and eventually it's all going to be covered up and you're never going to see any difference in value. Again, our goal here is to go for close. Go as close as you can for realism, for perfection, but be happy with what you achieve. That's what we're shooting for here. That's kind of going to be the theme of how we roll with this challenge. All right, we're going to continue to just white everything out, and you want to try to use less brush pressure as you're getting towards the end here. So don't have a ridge of paint up against the sketch lines. Try not to go over your sketch, okay? You really want to avoid getting this paint on the colored pencil, and use less brush pressure as you get towards the edges of the figure here. And then try to really smooth things out using long vertical strokes. So initially, you know, the kind of technique you want to use is to start with a lot of pressure and really squeeze that paint out of your bristles, and then you're going to spread it out, and then use some long sweeping strokes like this to smooth it out at the end. You can flip your brush over, get the paint that's on the other side, always keeping a wet edge. Now this is good practice for brush technique if you're not too familiar with acrylic painting. So this step will be very useful for you in that way. So here we go, and we're just applying this again using these long sweeping brush strokes. As we get in towards the hair that perhaps, you know, you have some stray hands of stray strands of hair. That's a tongue twister. You'll want to just go ahead and not get too close in. If you don't get every grid line covered, it's okay. So notice I'm not getting in there too close. I am leaving a little bit of negotiation room here. Okay, we'll just kind of continue down toward the bottom. And again, you don't have to get right up towards the figure. There, it should look something like this. So that's kind of the first part of this step number one. And now we're going to go to the interior and do a little bit more work on that. And again, let's go for the larger areas first, and then we'll kind of dial down to the smaller areas. And that's kind of the way we're going to do the entire painting process, actually. Start large, go down to small. So we're going to now fill in the areas on her shirt. And one thing to keep in mind too is that if the value is quite dark, eventually the grid lines will kind of get covered, but I'm just going to go over this anyway, even though I probably don't necessarily have to, because her shirt is kind of going to end up being a dark color, a dark value, and this light grid line will probably disappear under those layers of paint. But you know, I know a lot of artists like to not see those grid lines during the painting process, and so for that reason I'm just going to fill this in. Okay, so we're just going to fill this in, and you don't have to have a lot of paint on your brush. You can kind of push out some paint at the end so you can get a little bit of a nuance here. Now as you get in towards these wrinkles, just kind of cut in, turn your brush at an angle like this. All right, rather than having it go flat across, just tilt it like that, and then it's going to be able to cut in there better into those smaller areas. Now we're going to dip our brush in, get a little bit more on, and how much brush or how much paint do you want on your brush? You know, not too much, but something like this. You know, just a nice decent amount is what you want. Maybe halfway up the bristles, coated on both sides. And then if you're going into a smaller area, you don't want to use too much. So here I probably have too much actually, so I'm going to take some of that and share it with the palette area here. So we're just going to kind of fill in some of the grid lines there. And we have a little shadow there. Now the shadow on the palette that's being cast by the paint brushes, don't paint over that. So just really follow what I'm teaching you here, this process, and you'll do well with that. And we'll just continue across. Okay, and we're just basically covering in the palette right now, getting out those grid lines. Again, kind of working from left to right, but then also large to small. So these are the larger areas, we want to tackle those. And notice how I'm holding my brush kind of more at the end. I'm not holding it up here like we would if we were writing. Again, you hold it more towards the end. All right, so about halfway to, you know, third towards the end, and that's going to give you a little more control on that. Now, if your paint is starting to get a little tacky, you can add a little bit of a mist of water to it. All right, so you could always just kind of spray in there, and I use, you know, a sprayer like this and just add a little bit. But you have to be careful to not add too much, because if it's too watery, it's not going to cover well, and you'll have to, you know, do a couple more layers to make that cover. But here we're just going to really cover that nice and smooth, spread that out. All right, and I have that little area on her arm. I kind of neglected that. It started to dry a bit, but no worries. You can just kind of push into that paint and get whatever ridges on there smoothed out. So that's not a big deal. Now I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so you can really see kind of the texture of what this looks like, and kind of a little closer part of the application. Okay, we'll just get a little bit down here now on the bottom of the dress area. All right, fill that in. Okay, and now at this stage, let's shift to using a smaller brush, and we'll take our flat. We'll take this smaller flat, this 1/4 inch flat, and now we're going to fill in some of the areas on her face. So let's scroll it up to there, and I'll show you how to do that. Take that, like I say, and just kind of fill it in, dipping in very, very lightly here. Not a lot of paint on your brush, just like this. And we're gonna fill in that whole area, but try not to go over any of your colored pencil or any shading you've put on her face. All right, on the cheek, add a little bit more there. A little bit on her nose and the cheek, other cheek, now the chin. Let's just zoom it out a little bit so we can see this better. All right, we'll add a little bit on her chin here. Just like that. Now use really light pressure, kind of sweep it across. Rest your hand on the canvas for a little more support. And now let's go and flip our brush over, or if you need to dip it again in the paint, you can. Let's get some on her neck. And again, any areas where you have shadow, like right here, if you drew that shadow from her chin being cast onto her neck, don't paint over that, because that's a darker value, so it's not going to matter if there's a grid line running through it. Really avoid getting into any of the pencil lines. Now you can flip your brush at an angle here. Again, this is the broad edge of the brush, this is the skinny edge. You can flip it at a 45-degree angle and really get those smaller nooks and crannies filled in. Okay, so as we step back here, I think we're pretty close. I'm just going to do a couple final areas on this edge here. You can use this small brush to kind of cut in any areas where you weren't able to get really close up. But as you're painting, always try to get your brush line smoothed out so you don't have a lot of ridges. But if you do have a few ridges, don't fret about it, because this is a painting, right? It's not a photograph. We are trying to keep this as smooth as possible. In this glazing technique, we minimize the texture Whereas with other techniques that are more opaque, they tend to, you know, have more brush texture, you know, whether they're abstract or impressionistic. But in this realistic style, we're going for as smooth as possible. But again, don't fret if there are brush lines, because this is a painting, and there's always going to be some brush marks, and that's how we can tell it's a painting. So now let's go ahead and see if there's any other areas here that we can just touch up, again, where the grid lines maybe are showing through. And if you get, you know, a little too much paint on, you can just dab it with your finger or a wet rag and kind of wipe that off. Acrylic paint is fairly non-toxic. I mean, it's not like you'd want to eat it, but it is definitely more non-toxic than oils and paints like that. So we get a little bit up to the edge here. And yeah, overall, I think that's looking good. Now, if you need to hit it with another coat, you know, and it depends on the quality of your paint. If you use Nova Color or Liquitex, you should have no problem going over your grid lines with one coat. It does also depend on how dark you made your grid lines in the first place. So if they're still kind of showing through after this dries, then go ahead and apply a second coat on top. Now, how long should you let it dry? I would say maybe about an hour should be good, but it does depend on your environment, how humid it is. So you'll want to just do the test of putting your hand on it and feeling if it feels cold to the touch, it's still got moisture underneath trying to escape. So let it dry some more. To be on the safe side, give it a few hours to even a day and it'll be dry for sure. But in most cases, you know, a couple hours, it should be completely dry. We're not applying very thick layers of paint here. So let it dry for, you know, a couple of hours, come back to it. And if you need to add another layer, you can do that. I'm looking at this here, and in fact, it's already like surface dry. So this could literally be dry in about 30 minutes, and I could apply another layer. So again, you'll just kind of have to test it and see how it looks, see how it feels, and you could hit it with another layer. Okay, so that's what you want to do. I don't think I'm going to hit this with another layer. I really like how this looks. I think the grid lines are covered nicely. I might do just a couple more areas with my small round brush because I can cut in a little better. So you might want to take your small round brush for this purpose. And any areas that, you know, you weren't able to get close enough within, you know, applying over your grid lines and not actually applying on top of the colored pencil detail for the facial features, you can take your small round brush and cut in for that if you need to. It's a lot like house painting, you know, where you use that roller, but then you use the cutting brush around your trim. Same kind of thing. So we'll just kind of cut in here in that area because I wasn't able to quite get that close enough. And here's what I'd like you to avoid doing. Whatever you do with this process here, whatever you do, do not just take your brush and paint one stripe down across the grid lines. Don't do that, please. I encourage you to not do that. Like, don't just take, you know, your brush and paint down and across in each grid line. You might be tempted to do that to conserve paint or make it easier on yourself, but please don't do that, because if you do, you're going to end up with those lines and they will stand out. They will, you'll see these big streaks running across your painting and you'll be able to see exactly where the grids were. You want to try to camouflage it, and so just paint over the whole thing just like I've demonstrated. Paint over the whole section and camouflage your grid lines so that it ends up, you know, looking like what we see here. And I'll scroll down here with my camera so you can kind of get a idea of what it should look like when it's finished. Now we'll scroll back up again. All right, so that's what you're shooting for. You're not going to want to have that look of ghost grid lines or, you know, white streaks on your painting. All right. So at this stage here, our next step after everything dries completely, and I would say let it dry even more than in between coats of putting another layer of titanium white on it if you need to do that. Let it dry completely, you know, within an hour or two. Then you can do step number 2. And step number 2 is where we seal in the sketch. And so now it's getting exciting here. So we're getting kind of more into the painting process. And what we want to do then is seal it in with matte medium. All right, so it's the next day. Now, it wasn't necessary to have this dry overnight, but that's just how it worked out with my schedule. Everything is bone dry, so let's go ahead and seal in the sketch. We'll want to remove the canvas off of our easel and lay it flat on a table. Let's go ahead and do that. All right, we have the canvas flat on a table, and what we want to do is spray seal the canvas in. In the past, I've had some issues with students doing a brush matte medium application of paint, or a brush application of matte medium on their canvas, and what happened was their sketch started to smear really badly. And although, you know, painting can still be rescued from that state, I don't want to have that happen to a student, especially when they're just beginning. So to counteract that, I came up with this method of doing a spray seal first, and then that will actually keep the brush application from disturbing your colored pencil and causing it to smear all over. So what you want to do is you want to take a little spray bottle, fill it with some water, and you're looking at maybe filling it up to about quarter full, and then take a piece of tape and mark it off at a ratio of maybe 1/3 to 2/3, maybe just a little less than that, even like a quarter to 3/4 would be good. And we're going to add matte medium up to that line, and we'll shake it really well. So let's do that. And we'll go ahead and just squirt in a little bit of matte medium here. Okay, and just basically we want to get it up to that line. Let me just give it one more squirt. Okay, full squirt here. And then we're going to just shake that really good. Give it a nice thorough shake. Okay, and then let's go ahead and spray apply this on the canvas. We'll want to start kind of at the top and work our way down, and hold this maybe about this far away. I'd say about 12 to 18 inches away. I'll just spray it off to the side just to make sure I got a good mix. Yeah, it seems pretty good. All right, let's go ahead and do that. Now it's going to spray a little bit different than just straight water would. You might get a little bit of a globular mixture in it, but that's okay. Just get that basically covering it nice and even. Doesn't have to be a solid layer or film of the matte medium water on there, but just, yeah, that should be good. Okay, might have a few droplets on there, that's okay. This should all dry nice and even, and then when you're done, you're going to have an excellent surface to be able to actually brush apply that matte medium onto. Now you might ask, well, couldn't I just use like a spray fixative? I don't recommend spray fixatives. In the past, I've seen very bad things happen to paintings where spray fixatives were applied. It happened like several years ago when I was just learning the glazing technique, actually, and it was cemented in my 16, 17-year-old brain that you just don't do that, because a student had done that and her painting actually started to peel. The paint started to peel off of that spray fixative. And then one of my students just a few years ago did something similar, and that same kind of thing happened. Her matte medium and paint would adhere to the surface, and it was kind of blotchy. And so I don't recommend spray fixatives. I like to keep everything 100% acrylic. That way I know it's non-toxic, and I know it's archival. It's going to last for years and years to come. And I just like everything being acrylic. So that's how I teach it. If you use spray fixative, that's up to you, but I won't guarantee any results. All right, so let this dry here for about 30 minutes to an hour. Basically, you just want to make sure that you don't see the water droplets on there, because when you look at it, you will see water droplets until that dries completely. And then after that's completely dried, you can go to the next step, which will be to brush apply the matte medium. All right, so I will see you in that next step after this dries. Oh yeah, one important thing. You might be wondering, can I accelerate the dry time on this? Yes, you can. You can use a blow dryer if you keep it far enough away on a low setting. You can also put it outside in the sun or wherever more air can get to it, as long as it's in a safe place and you keep it flat. It should always be kept flat when it's drying, so you don't have the puddles of matte medium water mixture dripping down and creating issues. So yeah, all right. I have it drying right now outside as we speak, and in just a little bit, I'll meet you right back here, and then we'll go ahead and we'll do the brush application of matte medium. All right, we have the canvas back. It's nice and dry. I have it flat on the table again, and now it's time to do the brush sealing application to seal in your sketch. By the way, it would be a good idea, in case you haven't already thought of it, to rinse out your spray bottle just by putting in some fresh water and giving your spray pump a few sprays. Clean out that nozzle, and then you can use this for the next time, or use it for misting your palette and keeping your palette paints moist. But yeah, just clean out that nozzle, because that matte medium will dry in there, and then the spray bottle will be useless after that. So we don't want to have that happen. Anyway, so we have the canvas here flat on the table. It's nice and dry. It only took, I'd say maybe 15 minutes tops. Maybe it was even dry before that. And we're ready to do the brush application. Now, it would probably take longer depending on your environment. If you have it drying inside, it'll take way longer. So make sure that is in fact bone dry. No moisture to the touch. But yeah, this is completely dry and ready to go here. All right, so what we want to do is we'll take a 1-inch brush, and if you have a larger one like this 3-inch brush here, fantastic, but most people don't have those on hand, at least that I'm aware of, so I want to make sure you can do it with what you have from the supplies list. You can take a 1-inch brush like this, and we'll go ahead and get some matte medium in a little container, and we're just going to dip in and start to brush seal this in. Now, because we have that spray application in here already, it shouldn't disturb this colored pencil at all, or very minimally. So let me get this set up here, and we're going to start on the side farthest away from us. So I'm going to start right here and just kind of start brushing that. You just want to make sure you have a good application of matte medium, and we want to smooth that out. Okay, give it a few times to really smooth it out nicely. Make sure you have everything covered. Then we'll go ahead and we'll just continue on here. Smooth it out. And it'll be easier if you have a larger brush, but you can definitely do it with a 1-inch. Okay, and then after we brush it back and forth a few times, use some long gliding strokes to smooth it out. You want to start that matte medium about halfway, 2/3 in, not on the edge. or it's going to drip off the side. And this does make a mess, so you know, whatever environment you paint in, just make sure you're okay with drips getting on the floor, or you know, put drop cloth down, or newspaper, or whatever. Or if you have a larger table, you know, then that'll catch the drips, and you can put newspaper around it or whatever works. Towels. I have an art studio dedicated to this space, so it doesn't matter if I get drips on the floor. My wife won't get mad. All right, so we just continue this process, and again, smooth it all out. You might notice a little bit of smearing, just a little bit. That's normal because that spray application didn't entirely seal it in. It's just, you know, you got kind of the surface of it covered with matte medium, but it didn't entirely seal it in, and that's why this process is necessary. So if you do have a little bit of bleed through, you know, a little bit of the colored pencil kind of leaking out, so to speak, and colorizing other areas, that's okay. The main thing is that you don't lose a detail of your sketch. So if you follow this process and you're using the right kind of matte medium that I've recommended, you shouldn't have a problem with this at all. Keep that going. I'm just going to look at it, make sure I've got everything. I can't see if there's any streaks in here from the angle I was at, so I just kind of have to tilt my head in the way. Try to do it off camera here. I just want to make sure we got this nice and smooth. Now this is a little different than applying varnish. Varnish, you definitely don't want to overbrush it. This is not critical if you overbrush it, because if it gets a little bit cloudy from overbrushing, it's not going to be a big deal. You're still going to see your sketch just fine. Just glide it right across. Alright, we're just about ready to finish up this edge, and I just like to kind of make sure I've got just enough but not too much so that it's dripping all over the place. Alright, let's just finish that with some nice smooth strokes, top down, left to right. And you always want to apply gesso, matte medium, seals like this, varnish, in the orientation of the canvas. That's just the way it's done, and it gives you a better appearance when you look at it on your wall. Less texture in the way. So if the painting was long ways, you do it that way, but since it's longer vertically, we're gonna go with that orientation. And all right, so that should be good. As long as you don't have any major drips, all the areas are covered. Even if you see a few streaks, it should dry nice. Yeah, it should end up drying really nice and smooth and to a very, very flat finish. So you just want to basically let that dry for, again, about 30 minutes or so to an hour or more, depending on your environment. It could take as much as 2 hours to dry. You just have to test it. Make sure it's not cool to the touch or you can't feel any moisture. I'm going to take this outside again. We got a beautiful, sunny, hot day in Wisconsin. It's probably in the high 70s. It's going to be in the 80s very soon. So this will dry just like that. So I'm going to take it outside and I'm going to keep it flat. That's very important to keep it flat as it dries. And then when we're all done with this, when this is completely dry, then we can do that last step. And that's going to be where we tone in the sketch. So I'll see you there. Just hang out here, let your sketch dry, and I'll meet you in that last step in this video. All right, let's do step number 3, where we tone in the sketch. So you've got the sketch all sealed in, that layer of matte medium's completely dry, and I had this outside for, well, longer than it needed to be. It's almost 90 degrees here in Wisconsin as I'm recording this. But yeah, just make sure it's completely dry. And then what we're gonna do is tone the sketch in. So what that involves is just putting over a kind of a layer, a ground is what they also call it too, where we're going to take it from stark white to giving it a little tint, giving it a little bit of color, darkening the value just slightly, and also muting the sketch a little bit as well, so we can make it easier to transition out of, you know, a sketch into a painting. So that's what we're going to do here in this step. And so for that, what you'll want to have is a cup of matte medium and another cup of titanium white, raw sienna, and burnt sienna. So let me show this to you what it looks like. You just have something like this with the two containers, and you want very small amounts, just like what we see right here. Okay, just a little dab, little squirt of each. And what you're going to do is you're going to squirt a little extra matte medium into this cup. So let's do that. And that'll just allow us to kind of mix everything together and see what the color looks like. We'll just use this this little whisk. You could use anything that can mix, the butt end of a brush or a little stick or straw or anything that you think of that can stir. Okay, so this is kind of the color we have here. All right, so we're going to take that, and then what we're going to do is we'll use this palette knife and scoop just a little bit of that into the larger, or I should say the other cup of matte medium. I'm just going to take that mixture, kind of scoop it in, and that way we'll have everything kind of pre-mixed. All right, so you just take a few dabs of that, mix it so it looks something about like this, and then we'll go ahead and we'll test this out. And what we're going to do is get a little piece of paper, any kind of scrap paper that has some text on it. That's all you want. This has just a little bit of writing on it. So just grab a piece of scrap paper with writing on it. We'll just kind of test this out and see what it looks like on there, and how dark this toning layer is. Okay, so that's maybe just a little bit darker than what we want. So I'm going to add just a bit more matte medium into the container, and then we'll go ahead and stir that. And then we'll try that again. All right, we'll just do another test here. That's a little bit lighter. All right, that's not bad. But let's actually lighten it up a little more. In fact, we'll go ahead and we'll dump some of this out into the other container, and then add just a bit more here. Sometimes you have to test it out, make sure you have the right amount. And ideally, I probably shouldn't have put as much in there. I didn't think it would affect it that much. Okay, we'll test this one more time. See what we have here. Let's just flip it over. Yeah, that looks better right there. That's quite a bit lighter. And I think that'll be good just to tone this in. Give us a bit of color on this canvas. All right, now let's go ahead and apply it. So we'll start here in the upper corner and just kind of work our way down. And it should, again, just barely tone this in. So just dip your brush in. We'll just kind of smooth this out using this 1-inch flat brush. Just try to get this as smooth as possible. If you have a few streaks, it's not going to be horrible, but just try to get it as smooth as you can. Kind of see the brush in action. Now we're going to just move from left to right. All right, so just to give you good practice on brush control, just try to bring that all the way to the bottom. Use some somewhat diagonal strokes to smooth it out, but keep the wet edge. And once you have, you know, the left side kind of smoothed out, then just lift up and use firm brush pressure like this. You want to make sure that this layer is, you know, as light as possible. So you want to really spread this out. Okay, we're using again some slight diagonal strokes to kind of smooth that out. Let's fill in the bottom. Go like that and just smooth it out. Okay, let's continue on. Let's get the bottom half. If you have a wider brush, that will probably make it easier as well. Okay, now let's do some smoothing out here. Use firmer pressure if you need to really smooth it out. But once you have that distributed nice, and we're just using firm pressure back and forth, then you can lift up and just do brush strokes going vertically. Add a little piece of dried matte medium in there. And then just go vertically and smooth this out like that. All right, so if it ends up being a little darker in one area, like here it seems to be a little darker right by her hair, not a big deal. You don't want to, it doesn't have to be perfect, so don't overbrush it. You just want it to be smooth enough. And again, if you have streaks on here, not a huge thing, because we will be going over with many, many layers, and we're going to smooth it all out. So that's kind of what we're looking for. So this actually, you know, technically we could have had a little more titanium white in the mix, but I'd prefer that you don't end up losing too much detail in your sketch. And I've seen that in some previous portrait challenges where, you know, there's a little too much titanium white in this toning layer, and it actually kind of covered up certain portions of the sketch. So if you follow, you know, that visual that I gave you for using those small little amounts and then test it out, make sure it's pretty light, pretty translucent. Again, then we're looking at something like this for what we want to apply in there. So it's very, very translucent, and this gives you a good idea of, you know, what the glazing technique is like. And you know, this this really is all about mixing a little bit of paint with a lot of matte medium and making it very translucent or semi-transparent, so you can see right through it. But this really gives you a nice nice idea of what your muting layer or toning layer should look like before you apply it onto the canvas. So just test it out. This is good practice for you to get a sense for how the glazing technique works if you haven't used it before. It's a little bit different than what you're used to with going all opaque with acrylic. We go very, very light, and we build up depth with each subsequent layer. Again, this is kind of what you're looking for, just a nice toning layer. And again, just to hold up a piece of white paper next to this, you can see it's not much darker. It's just a little bit darker than this white paper. Kind of gives us something to work out of, and it just makes it a little less intimidating than a white canvas. So you'll have something that already has established your flesh tones slightly in the face and the wood of the palette, and then some of the warm tones in her clothing, and even some of the warmth of the background. So anyway, this is where we're at, and we're gonna finish up the lesson here. So if you've accomplished this much, you've gone ahead and you've whited out your grid lines, you've sealed in your sketch, and you've toned it in, again, high fives to you. I'm proud of you. That was not necessarily an easy thing to do. There was a lot of different steps involved, and we're just building on this knowledge here, starting out with things that are easy and then progressing to things that are a little more complex as we go along in this process. But again, I'm proud of you. You've done a great job. So go ahead and just let this dry. And then in our next lesson, we're going to actually begin putting some different colors onto the canvas. We're going to be blocking in the value structure, and then eventually we'll be segueing into skin tones and detail. So this is going to be a fun time here teaching you and seeing your progress in this painting. Hey, if you have any questions, let me know below in the comments. Get a hold of me via email. You have my email if you've registered, and if you haven't registered, go ahead and do that in the link below, realisticacrylic.com/acrylic-portrait-painting-challenge. If you need any help at all with your portrait, we are going to have critiques available. So if you're registered, you will get an email letting you know when the next critique will be taking place. So as I record this video, we're going to have a live critique Thursday, June 1st on Zoom. And if you're registered, you'll get the email invitation for that. So looking forward to helping you with your sketch on the critique, answering any questions you have. But it's been my pleasure to teach you this much of the process, and we're just barely getting started. It's going to get really fun once you see that painting develop. Be sure to post this, post your progress in our Facebook group, Realistic Acrylic Portraits. Ask questions there, help out your other fellow artists, and we're in this together. We're gonna have a great time painting a portrait we can be proud of. All right, so looking forward to teaching you more. God bless, and we'll talk to you soon.